Here's a little fun fact. Did you know that for over 5 years, I taught thousands of people at hundreds of different events, both in person and online, how to grow their businesses? And I did this for Google. And now I want to do it for you. I'm offering up some special complimentary coaching opportunities for a few lucky Wise Squirrels. Visit wisesquirrels.com/coaching. Welcome to Wise Squirrels, the podcast for late diagnosed adults with ADHD. I'm your host, Dave Delaney. This episode is brought to you by our friends at Focused Space. That's focused.space. This week I participated in the Focused Space Power Hour, which was a full hour of body doubling and guided meditation and co-working all virtually, and it was incredibly rewarding. What I love about Focus Space is it is live with other people participating, and it's guided, which is such a great way to get the work done that you're working on, whether it's something small, whether it's a big project, whether you've got looming deadlines. I truly do find it rewarding, and I do encourage you to check out Focus Space. Obviously, they are a sponsor of the podcast, and we do thank them for their support. But I wouldn't take a sponsorship from somebody I didn't believe in with a service I didn't trust. And I do encourage you to give it a try. And why not? Over at focused.space, if you use the coupon code DAVE, you're going to get the first month for free. And then you'll get 25% off every month after that. So what have you got to lose? Give it a try. And I would love to hear from you. Let me know what you think of Focused Space, and we thank them for their support. And while I'm speaking about supporting the show, I do want to give a special shout out to David and Chris, who are our latest Patreon supporters. You guys help make the show what it is, and I can't do it without you. So I do want to say thank you to both of you. And if anyone would like to support the show that way, you can visit wisesquirrels.com/love for details on becoming a Patreon or other ways to support the show. I recently received an email from a listener with a question. I have a grandson. I'm leaving the ages out so that, for privacy, but I have a young grandson who is obviously ADHD, but the mother is resistant to discuss it. The grandfather, who is the person submitting the question, and the father and the uncle all are diagnosed with ADHD. This person wrote, I can see it, but have learned to not discuss it at this point in front of the mom. It doesn't stop us from smiling and giving each other a knowing nod when we observe behavior we recognize as ADHD from our grandson. I guess the question is, how do we deal with mom? Or do we just stand back and let the school system bring it to her? He's already having issues with behavior and being still in class, so that time is coming. I love the podcast, and when I get caught up, I will probably re-listen just to take in the many nuggets of wisdom. Well, thank you for this question and comment. Again, I'm not a doctor and I'm not an ADHD coach, so I do always have to preface it with that point. But if the mother is not willing to accept this, I would say let the school notify the parents and discuss it. As a grandparent, I suppose maybe it's best not to get involved. At least that's my 2 cents on it. It's worth probably approaching once or twice, but as you said, the mother's always resistant to the discussions. So if you've attempted to do this already and you didn't get far, it's really between the father and the mother of the child. So I would leave it to them to sort out. And as you said, if the child's already having trouble at school nowadays, thankfully, hopefully this will come up. And thank you for the question. If you have questions, you can always visit the website, wisesquirrels.com, and you could submit your questions to me or comments, and I'll make sure to mention them on the show. A quick reminder, The content provided in this podcast is for informational purposes only and should not be considered a substitute for professional medical advice, diagnosis, or treatment. I'm not a medical professional, so always seek the advice of a qualified healthcare provider regarding any medical condition, including ADHD. Reliance on any information you hear on this podcast is solely at your own risk, so it's always best to talk with your doctor. Today, I'm speaking with Julie Saad, who is an ADHD and nutrition coach, and she's a certified functional therapeutic diet specialist. She has a lot of great information to share today, and some of it may be controversial, some of it you may question, and I want to make sure that you do your own research, and by doing your own research, I mean speaking with your doctor before making any diet choices. Julie's got a lot of great information here. I did research and check a lot of what she spoke about, and most of which I found to be true and accurate. So I do encourage you to sit back and listen to the interview. And even if your diet is not a topic that you are overly interested in, you need to listen to today's interview just to hear Julie's incredible story of getting on a tandem bike and riding 6,000 miles from Alabama all the way to Colombia, the country. That alone is well worth hearing. So there's a lot of great conversation today. Julie's awesome. I do encourage you to check her out. And with that, I will shut up and get on with the show. I began our conversation today by asking Julie about how she became an ADHD coach and nutritional therapist.
I got into it from my own experience with nutrition and ADHD, and I realized that there was kind of a gap because you can work with a dietitian, but they don't always know about mental health, and you can work with a mental health practitioner, but they don't always take the diet part into account. And the two really go hand in hand. You really can't treat people like portions of people. We're whole people. So that's kind of my philosophy and how I got into it through my own experience. And so I've been working, with people with ADHD who are mainly interested in fixing their overall health as a way of helping their ADHD symptoms, go away a little bit.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. And you were diagnosed at 35 by your friends, is that right?
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Yeah. Tell me that story.
Okay, so it's a long and wild story. Basically, how this all started. So I struggled with a lot of ADHD symptoms my whole life, mainly procrastination. Procrastination was my biggest struggle. This idea of you want to do the thing, you need to do the thing, you have to do the thing, but you just can't sit down and do the thing. That was my life story. This caused problems in school, obviously, because I would do everything at the last minute. This caused problems with, applying for jobs. I wouldn't fill out the applications on time and things like that. Everything was always down to the wire at the last minute. I was exhausted. That was just my constant life. It was just one chaos situation to another chaos. I lived in a constant state of chaos. And my inability to really do anything that I wanted to do without making it into this big drama really took a toll on my self-esteem. Specifically, I wanted to go to a good college, and I had good grades. I could have gotten into a great school, but I didn't do the application. And so you need to do the application to go to school. So I went to a school that turned out to be okay, but it wasn't, my dream college. So things like that, I just kind of walked around with this kind of feeling of, wow, I'm smart, but I can't get anything done. So it really just made me feel horrible. And I didn't know what was going on. I had been diagnosed with everything else. I've been diagnosed with depression, anxiety, bipolar with rapid cycling. I don't feel that I have any of those. I was even diagnosed with anorexia because I didn't like the food at school. It's not, I just didn't like the food. So I was handed all these, what I would say are incorrect diagnoses. And then when I was in my mid-30s, one of my best friends was studying psychology, and she kept saying, I think you have ADHD, and she has it. And I said, nah, I don't have it. And a couple other people mentioned it too. And I said, well, I don't have it. I don't have a problem concentrating. I can concentrate on anything, just maybe not the thing I want to concentrate on. So I thought, nah, you guys are wrong. I don't have that. But then in the most ADHD turn of events, I was walking down the street one day and I found a book on the sidewalk in a box that somebody was just giving away books for free. And I said, ooh, free books. And I just grabbed a bunch of them. And one of them happened to be a book about ADHD. I don't remember which one it was, but I think it was Driven to Distraction. So I got that and I started reading it and I said, oh, okay, that's me. And so that's how I realized, okay, that's pretty clear what's going on is ADHD. So let's do the next step and go to therapy. So then it gets even more ADHD. I signed up to go to a therapist. I wound up meeting with a therapist who specialized in CBT therapy. And I don't know how, but somehow I managed to not tell her that I suspected that I had ADHD when I got there. So I just showed up and we went through 6 months of CBT therapy. And then right when we were about to finish, I said, oh, by the way, I think I have ADHD. And she goes, no, I don't think you do. You make really good eye contact. And yeah. And I said, yeah, but I really do think that I do. And I'm forcing myself to make eye contact with you. Like, I really want to look at all the books behind you, but that would be rude. So she said, well, you can fill out this questionnaire and then we'll talk about it. So I filled it out and I got an almost perfect score. If it were a really good test, Yeah. I think I only said no to one of the questions. So I took it into her and she said, okay, you can talk to the psychiatrist that we have here. So I talked to her and that's when I was handed a formal diagnosis. So that's how I got my lovely little diagnosis.
Well, that's a really good lesson there too for folks, because if you feel that you might have ADHD or haven't received a proper diagnosis, not to just give up, because I hear horror stories of some doctors who don't recognize it still. And so that comes up from time to time as well. So yeah, it's important to fight for it if you feel like you might have ADHD.
Yeah, that's an excellent point, actually. So I've heard, first of all, a lot of people just don't get diagnosed. Like, it's not recommended to them or it's not suggested. It never comes up. So they never realize it. So that's one group of people. There's another group of people who go to their doctors or their therapists or what have you, and they say, I think I have this. And they're told, no, you got good grades, or no, you're holding down a job, or no, like whatever. And they're just kind of gaslit, let's say, and told like, no, you don't have it. Which can cause a lot of, let's say, like a lot of damage for people, because they feel like, well, what's going on with me then? What is it if it's not that? So that's another thing that can happen. And then people can also be told, no, you don't have it. But they have symptoms that are similar. And so in that case, I would say, well, if you don't have the formal diagnosis, okay, you probably won't be able to be prescribed medication if that's the route that you want to go down, but you can still look into the strategies that somebody with an ADHD diagnosis has. The strategies will probably work for you, even if you don't have the stamp on your proverbial forehead that says ADHD. Like, you can still use those strategies. It's not like an exclusive brain club that that requires like a membership fee.
Are there what were some of those strategies that you've found work well?
So, for example,
let's wait one sec.
Sorry, I live in Latin America.
Yeah.
And I don't know if the echo is really bad in this room. I'm in the room with a router because I thought.
Yeah.
So I don't know if there's.
That's okay.
It's okay. Okay.
Yeah. So yeah, I was asking you about some of those strategies that you found worked for you well.
So here's a strategy that didn't work for me when I was in therapy before getting my diagnosis. The therapist said, well, why don't you give yourself a reward after you finish your work? Because at the time I was struggling with horrible procrastination. Like, what would happen would be that I would go to my office. I had a photography studio. So I would go to my office/photography studio and sit in the chair outside of the studio and play on my phone for hours. before actually going in. And I couldn't even get into the freaking studio. I don't know. And now I know what was going on, but at the time I didn't know. And so she said, well, why don't you give yourself a reward afterwards? And so I tried that strategy and it didn't work. At all. And it just made me feel worse because a professional brain person had told me to try this strategy. And I really must be a mess if I can't even do that. But what I've found out now is that I work pretty well when I give myself the reward before or during the thing. And, you would think, well, that's not going to work. You have to kind of dangle this reward in front of yourself. Actually, no. It requires a little bit of self-love and a little bit of trust because it's like, yeah, in theory, you could take the reward and run and not do your thing. So it does require you to trust yourself that, you know what, I am going to do this. And so it doesn't have to be, a huge reward. It could be, if you really like coffee, you could make your favorite cup of coffee when you sit down to do your work instead of saying that you'll do it afterwards. Or you can, you can go outside and get some sunshine as a reward before you sit down and start. And so I found that helps me a lot. Like giving myself the reward first, it kind of, boosts your dopamine if you want to look at it that way. And I think it's also, from an emotional standpoint, really good for us because, growing up with ADHD, how much time do we spend beating ourselves up or being, beaten up by others? Of you're late, you were disorganized, you didn't do the thing, what's wrong? Why did you say that? We have this kind of inner monologue sometimes that can be really negative. And so, kind of doing these acts of like, I can do it, like, and thinking about the positives instead of just always berating ourselves of saying like, I have to do, that kind of angry, stressful energy sometimes can work and sometimes can motivate us, but that's not sustainable. If you're doing that every single day, every hour to get yourself going, you're going to crash and burn eventually. So, I prefer rewarding myself beforehand.
No, and I love that. Are there strategies or things that you've seen work well to help those with ADHD learn to accept themselves? Because you were diagnosed at 35, I was diagnosed at 50. So what are some strategies or some ideas about how to better accept ourselves?
Yeah, that's a great question. So there are lots of different ways. The first one that comes to mind, could be working with a coach or therapist to look at those negative thoughts. In my case, when I went to this CBT therapist, the therapy really didn't help my ADHD. Maybe because I forgot to tell her that I have ADHD or thought I did, but it helped me so much with my negative thoughts. I remember that one of the kind of homework assignments that she gave me when we first started was she said, I want you to write a list of all the bad things you say to yourself this week. I said, okay. Oh my God, Dave, like you wouldn't believe. I remember it was something like 3 or 4 pages full of just over and over again, like you're lazy, you're this, you're that, like all. And I realized, oh my gosh, no wonder I feel like crap. I'm telling myself this constantly, like you're lazy, you're never going to get this thing done, or you're just so disorganized, just over and over and over again. So just the first step really is realizing like, okay, if that's a problem that you have, that you're constantly beating yourself up, then, that's something you need to first draw your awareness to. And then you can realize, okay, maybe this is not the best way to talk to myself, is one thing. Another thing is to think about, would you talk like this to another person? Like, would you say to your coworker, like, you're lazy, you're always late, I can't believe you, what's wrong with you? I don't think you would. Right. So what gives you the license to talk to yourself like that? You should be, of all the people in the world, you should be the nicest to, it should be yourself. So that's another thing, is just realizing, the way you talk to yourself is important. It does affect you. And then thinking, what thoughts can you replace? So this can be a little bit of a leap sometimes, right? Because, we see sometimes these affirmations and things like where you're supposed to say, I am a fountain of wealth and abundance, for example, if you're having money problems. And that can be a bit of a shock to some people. If, let's say, for example, you are struggling with money and you start trying to tell yourself, I am a millionaire. Well, that might feel disingenuous, let's say. That might feel fake. So maybe that'll work. But if that feels like too much, then you can try kind of creating these little affirmations or these, let's say, thought replacements that don't feel so extreme. So instead of saying like, I'm a multimillionaire, you might say, I take steps every day to improve my financial situation, for example. And if that's true, then you can repeat that, without feeling like a fraud.
Yeah.
So those could be a couple little strategies for ways to accept yourself more. Also, another thing that I love doing is I have what I call this kind of self-esteem booster. And it's a list of things that I love about myself. And this I got on the recommendation of a coach that I was working with. And so it's a list of all the things that are cool about me. Like I'm an amazing cook. I'm funny. I'm a good dancer, more or less. And just all these little things. And also that I help people take the pressure off themselves. Is what I came up with. And so when I saw that, I said, wow, okay, I help people take the pressure off themselves, like the toxic pressure. So I can do that too. I can also take that pressure off myself. So I look at those little cards. I put stickers all over them and everything because why not?
Yeah.
And I do stuff like that just to help change the way that I think about myself because, pretty cool at the end of the day. So just the way that we think about ourselves really, really is so important. It really affects everything that we do. And so just kind of drawing your attention and awareness to it and making it a conscious practice to begin changing the way that you think about yourself. It really is a powerful exercise.
And for listeners not familiar with Julie, she is super cool. Can you just share, just giving you a little more cool cred here, tell me about a bicycle ride 6 years ago that started in Alabama and ended up where?
It ended up in Medellin, Colombia, in South America.
Yeah, which is so cool. So yeah, tell us a little bit about that.
So how can I tell you about it? It was very slow. It took us a year and 4 months to go from Alabama to Colombia. We made it all the way to Popayán, which is in the south of Colombia, and it wasn't really my dream. It was actually the person I did the bike ride with. It was his dream, and it was an amazing experience because before I left on the trip, I was one of those people that was afraid to ask for help for anything. You could say it's a self-esteem thing, a shyness thing, I don't know. But I just had this thing in my head of like, no, I have to be self-sufficient. It's rude to ask for help. People don't want to help you. Leave people alone. I had that kind of attitude. When you're on a bike trip, you're going to get a flat tire in the middle of nowhere. You're going to run out of water. You're not going to make it to anywhere with a hotel sometimes. And you're going to need to ask people for help, whether you like it or not. So, so during the course of the bike trip, I had to get over that. Like I had to ask for water, for help, for instructions, in a language that I was just barely learning. And luckily, everybody that I met in Latin America was just the nicest, most helpful person. And everyone was so sweet to us. People let us sleep in their houses. People gave us food. Little kids gave us mangoes. It was just an incredible experience. And so I came out of it very, very changed. I kind of got over myself, let's say. I got over this idea of like, I have to do everything myself and that, that we're all so separate. I realized, no, we're actually all quite connected, and it's really about the same amount of energy to help somebody as it is to tell them no. So you might as well just help people out in your day-to-day life.
Yeah. And how old were you when you did that bike ride? Was that before or after the diagnosis?
That was right after the diagnosis. So it was kind of related because I was prescribed medication, and I asked the prescriber if I could take the medication while I was on the bike ride, and to cover her butt. She said probably not a good idea, because you're in the heat and you're subject to dehydration and things like that. So I didn't really take it. I kept the bottle with me. I still have that bottle. That was 6 years. I have some 6-year-old Adderall in my bathroom cabinet. So I didn't really have a good chance to really try medication. I was on it for a brief period of time. And then I just took it very occasionally. I think the 2 times that I had to do my tax returns on the bike trip, I took it.
And so this was remind me, it was a tandem bike, was it not?
Yeah, it was.
Yeah, which is wild. So a pedal bike or like an electric bike?
Yeah, it was a pedal bike. It was 100% manpower.
Yeah, so like, and I think on the pre-call when we spoke, I mentioned like my brother. When my dad moved into a house, my brother and I found a tandem bike in the garage, and we rode it around here and there. But yeah, wow, like that's quite. How many miles do you know? How many miles did you clock it?
I want to say it was it 6,000 miles and 10,000 kilometers is what I want to say. Okay.
And how long did that bike ride take you?
With the breaks that we took, it took a year and 4 months.
And so, and the person that you did it with, was this like a partner or somebody or?
Yeah, it was actually my ex-husband. So,
okay.
And it was funny because when we started training on the tandem, we bumped into some other cyclists, and they said, "Oh, you know that in the biking community, they call tandems the divorce machine."
I was going to allude to that. I was curious, actually. I mean, gosh, my wife and I, back in the day, we backpacked Italy for 3 months, hitchhiking, and we had a tent, so we would camp in the tent along the way, and we'd stay at we'd do that. We would camp like 5 nights a week, and then 2 nights a week we'd stay at like a pensione or a hostel or something. But most nights we would just, cook our own food at the campsite kind of deal. And wine was really cheap, thankfully, so that helped. But yeah, so and I remember actually we were in like the Amalfi Coast, which is just breathtakingly beautiful. And I was talking to my dad on a payphone, doing the usual check-in to let him know I was still alive. And he's like, my dad says, and Heather, my wife, was sitting on a park bench, like not too far from me. And he says, Dave, you have worked with her in Ireland in a restaurant. You live together. You are now camping together. Like, for God's sake, marry her. And I put my hand over the receiver and yelled to Heather, "Hey, my dad thinks we should get married," like laughing.
What did she say?
And then afterwards we were like, it was like the most romantic location for a proposal and the worst proposal ever because, well, I guess not ever because she said yes, but we were like, wait a minute, I'm Canadian, you're American, if we're going to live together, that would help if we got married. We thought about it that way, and we love each other. So there's that.
Side note.
Side note. Yeah. Yeah. This is a pretty good idea. And we've been married for 22 years now. But it's interesting because my dad had failed 3 marriages, and he was giving me advice, and I was like, I don't know about this. But yeah, so it's interesting, yeah, in the best of times and the worst of times. I mean, when you put yourself in that kind of position, yeah. So the divorce machine, as you heard.
It's definitely a crucible. And the funny thing was, we stayed at a hostel in Antigua in Guatemala, and there was a couple there, and they were like, "Oh, how cool is your bike?" And we're like, "Oh, you can try it. Take it for a little spin around the block." They did. They came back and they were fighting. Like they were screaming at each other. The girl wound up saying "You go to the room, I'll stay down here. I don't want to talk to you." I was like, wow. In just one block, you guys are already fighting like cats and dogs. So that is the magic of a tandem bicycle. I do not recommend it at all.
Well, it is interesting, yeah, because I mean, and people are familiar with a tandem bike. I mean, it really does take 2 to ride it, and keeping up pace with each other, and and also I used to ride a bike in downtown Toronto, like everywhere. I would ride my bike everywhere. And, you ride for a long time. I mean, you do get sore and tired and all these things. So, yeah, I could imagine a tandem being, a challenging vehicle.
Yeah, it's true. It's true. And so I got remarried in 2020, and so my current husband is also a cyclist. It's just like my destiny. I can't I can't be with a person who's not a cyclist, apparently. And so we don't have a tandem, but we go on like little trips around town, and that tends to be okay because it's only an hour or two. So we manage to not have so many arguments because we're not attached to each other, like on that one, like on the tandem.
Right. And so tell me about the types of clients you help and what that looks like.
Yeah. So most of the clients that I work with at the moment are women, and for various reasons, some of them don't wish to be on medication or can't be on medication because of other conditions. And so what we tend to do is I do traditional ADHD coaching, which, there are various, let's say, theories and various schools of thought on it. But the method that I use is very closely related to cognitive behavioral therapy. Mm-hmm. And it uses also something that's called the insight model, which goes all the way back to Socrates. And so it's examining our thoughts and making sure that, we don't have thoughts that are getting in the way. And we usually do. so it's doing that. So that's the traditional ADHD coaching part of it. And, finding the strategies that will work for my clients in terms of beating procrastination, for example, or dealing with emotional dysregulation and things like that. And so we do that through coaching and working on goals. And then in addition to that, I'm also a nutritional therapist. And so I can help my clients look into nutrition as a way to kind of, let's say, reset the brain. And so there is a lot of research coming out, but it's still quite new in terms of mental health and nutrition. And the diet that's the gold standard right now is the ketogenic diet. And so this is something that I tell everybody I work with up front that this is, what I recommend. So many of my clients choose to try out this diet with me. Not all. Some of them do a little bit stricter version, which would be like a carnivore diet. And then some of them do a little bit more of a relaxed diet, which would be a paleo diet, which is just kind of cleaning up the crap in a nutshell. So we a lot of times will use nutrition as the basis, as like a springboard. To get the brain kind of working closer to the way that it should. Yeah.
And do you find I'm not well versed in this stuff. I do. I've experimented with lots of different diets over the years. My wife and I would do different. We did like Whole30, for example, kind of cutting out, and that's tough. Like Whole30, you cut out sugar and a lot of different foods, and then you stick with like the healthy stuff, and then you gradually reintroduce things in order to kind of get an idea of what is affecting you poorly. And I, on that diet, the only thing I could have was, or not the only thing, of course, but like if I went to Starbucks, for example, I could have a black coffee, and I used to drink it with cream and sugar and all that. And so I got a taste actually for coffee, like what coffee actually really tastes like, although I'm sure yours is better than mine, me being in the States and you being in Colombia. So I'm sure your coffee's much better. But so now I drink coffee black. But the other thing was, I remember like the other thing at Starbucks would be the egg whites. You could get like these egg whites. But I would go to like a Whole Foods and buy the baked chicken when I was traveling, because I do a lot of public speaking and I do a lot of traveling. So I would get like the whole chicken, the one that had no sugar, because the others did, and take it back to my hotel room. And like, if you saw me, it would be just, you would be like, oh my God, what the, like, it was like a crime scene, just me devouring a chicken. So tell me about like some of the stuff you've learned and some of the the diet recommendations through like a keto kind of diet?
Yeah, for sure. Well, let me ask you first of all, how did you feel on Whole30? Did you notice any changes?
I did feel, I certainly felt better for sure. I felt I had more energy. Yeah, I felt quite good. It's interesting. Like my wife and I would diet. We've never been really, never obese, but we always had a little bit of weight to lose. And so we try these different diets. The one time that I had great success in losing some weight was actually going vegan for 30 days. And at the time we also didn't drink, for 30 days. And we started running together for 30 days during that same period. But instead of using the measurement of our weight, we used the measurement of our cholesterol and our LDL and all that. And we saw a great result. I lost like 17 pounds doing that.
Okay, great. So I have a lot to say on the subject. Okay. So the interesting thing about, let me see. I made some notes here. Okay, so for something like Whole30, I have heard anecdotal reports of people who have, for example, put things like depression into remission. And Whole30 is pretty similar to the paleo diet, and things like, for example, children can often have a very profound mental health response just by going on paleo. So paleo is basically cutting out anything that we didn't eat pre-agricultural times, meaning no beans, no grains, and then none of the, sugars, breads, none of that stuff. That's a very, very, very basic explanation of it, but it's basically pre-agrarian, I think is the word, pre-agrarian or pre-agriculture. That would be something like paleo, which sounds pretty similar to Whole30 from what I understand. When I hear that you were having things like egg whites and baked chicken, it makes me worry that you might not have been getting enough fat. Because that's what it sounds like. It sounds like it was a lot of lean protein. So that would be something I would say if you're having egg whites and baked chicken. I don't know what else you're having, but it sounds like it might have been a very low fat diet, which is tricky. Because we need fat. It's not optional. So that's what I would think about that. In terms of going vegan, so I was a hardcore vegan for a long time. I started when I was in middle school, and I ended when I was in my mid-20s. And then I was a flexitarian after that. When I first started veganism, I felt great. I remember feeling really great the first week. And the reason is because I cut out the sugars and all that stuff too. I got really sick. I had a vitamin B12 and a vitamin D deficiency. So I don't recommend veganism at all to anybody. But a lot of people will say, I felt great. And it's, yeah, you will feel great in the beginning, definitely. Give it several years and you can have deficiencies. Everyone knows that you have to have B12 when you're vegan. And there are other things like DHA, which are super important. And there are no plant sources of DHA. The only closest one would be algae, which is technically not a plant. So who's going around eating all this algae? Nobody that I know, really. So veganism, I really, really do not recommend it. It's possible to do a ketogenic diet that's vegetarian, but vegan, it's possible, but I just don't recommend it. There are a lot of nutrients that we really do need from animal products.
My experiences, just to not to cut you off there, but my experiences with people in my life who have actually been vegan, most of them chose that because of the sort of ethics of diet rather than the health aspects. So they would, cows are really cute. Any thoughts on that?
Well, it's a whole other animal, pardon the pun. But there, and that was my reason too. I was a big animal lover. Unfortunately, what I read about it was information that was incorrect when I was making the decision. The information that I came across was saying this is the healthy way, this is better for you, and it's better for the environment. And a lot of that information is actually not really correct. we really, depending who you talk to, but there's a lot of evidence that we really have a long history as, omnivores, if not carnivores. In fact, we even have the stomach acid level of a scavenger. So there's evidence to suggest that we kind of went through our evolutionary process scavenging, eating brains, eating bones, the insides of bones. There's evidence of tools for that. So it's hard to make the case that veganism is a natural thing. The ethical thing, it's a big topic, but
Yeah.
I will say that there is sustainable farming. There's something called regenerative farming, and when you really look at it, these farms, which are mainly cattle, they can actually be beneficial to the planet. So a lot of people say that, this is ruining the planet. Actually, these farms can be quite beneficial. And a lot of the kind of vegetables and grains and everything that everyone thinks are so healthy are using a lot of chemicals in the process. And animals do die in this process, even though they don't end up on somebody's plate as a result. There are animals that are killed in vegetable farming and grain farming, and habitats are also destroyed for animals, in addition to creating a monoculture. So this idea that, saving the planet by being vegetarian or vegan is the way to go is not necessarily true. And if we want to get a little conspiracy theory here, there are a lot of people touting this as the only way to save the planet. And if you look at their financial ties, they have vested interests in fake meats and things like that. So that's my little thing there.
Yeah.
And then in terms of LDL is another thing, but did you want to say something?
Oh, no, go ahead.
I was going to say in terms of LDL cholesterol, so the number one prescribed drug in the world is statins, right? So many people are on statins. If you really look at the research, the idea that saturated fat is bad for you is a hypothesis that was never proven. You can look into this guy called Ansel Keys. He kind of started the whole hysteria around this back in the times of Eisenhower. And there's a lot of research coming out showing that a high LDL is actually linked to lower all-cause mortality. And if you think about it, the brain needs cholesterol. Everything, pretty much every process in our body needs cholesterol. And 80% of the cholesterol in our bodies is something that our body makes itself. So our body makes most of our cholesterol. So if cholesterol is so bad for us, why are we making it?
Yeah.
So this idea that your LDL needs to be low is actually a myth.
Hey, I wanted to jump in for a second. I hope you're enjoying this interview. I really like Julie a lot, and I think she has very valuable, helpful advice in this episode. I'm not suggesting Julie is incorrect here, but what I would suggest is that you talk to your doctor to get his or her answer to the question of whether a high LDL level is good, bad, or none of the above. In the research that I've done, I've looked at John Hopkins' website and others. My understanding is that a high LDL is a bad thing. It's an unhealthy thing, and it needs to be addressed. And to Julie's question about, why does our bodies produce it? And my understanding is that, and again, I'm not a doctor either, but cholesterol is not inherently a bad thing necessarily because it's needed for specific things that our bodies do, like cell membrane structure, hormone production, vitamin D synthesis, and bile production. So again, you don't want to have high LDL, but and your body does produce cholesterol, but not a high level of it. And so that's my understanding in looking into this, but I wanted to make sure to add that caveat here.
So if you give that a little Google search, you'll find a million people that disagree with me. And, but there are people coming out finally with the research here, and it's going to be, it's kind of a revolution, let's say, that this stuff eventually will come to light and people will realize that a lot of the information we've been told was wrong.
It's interesting too, because we, a lot of this is around science, and science changes over time when, new hypotheses are proven or disproven. And so things evolve over time. I recently watched a brand new documentary on Netflix called Poison, The Dirty Truth About Food. Have you seen this?
No, what is it?
Oh my gosh, man. It was heartbreaking because it was about, mainly salmonella poisoning, and stories, that started in the 80s with an outbreak around hamburgers and how it killed a bunch of children in the U.S. But then it went on to talk about some chicken and different, manufacturers and mass production of chicken and how that's caused it. And then they talked about there was a big spinach outbreak with salmonella a couple of years ago, and what had happened in the movie, they showed that let's say there's a farm that is or there's a farm that's growing spinach, let's say, but they also have cattle on one side of it or chickens or what have you. The water that's being circulated through the farm to water the produce like spinach or broccoli or whatever is recirculating feces from the animals that is leaking into the water, causing the fruits or vegetables to be contaminated. And so by the end of it, I was like, okay, mental note, stop eating. Because I was left like, okay, don't eat chicken. They did say don't eat cantaloupes, don't eat pre-cut fruit at the grocery store. Don't eat romaine lettuce. Don't eat prepared salads in bags. And I was just like, this is really interesting. And I wasn't doubting what was depicted in the film, but I was like, okay, what do I do with this information? I only have so much time in a day. I can't start a farm.
Right, exactly. And I think that's something that I hear from a lot of people is just that there's so much conflicting information about nutrition. If you think about it, if you grew up in the 80s or 90s, we had the low-fat craze, right? Where we were all told not to eat fat, and we all got pretty fat. So that turned out to not be the best advice. So there's just conflicting information everywhere, and it can be very stressful for sure. And I definitely felt that way. I felt like every week there's a new thing I wasn't supposed to eat. What I will say is that if you look at something like an ancestrally appropriate diet, what did our ancestors eat? I would say that is really the place to start if you're confused. So if you think about something and ask yourself, did this exist 10,000, 20,000 years ago in a human diet? If the answer is no, then you might want to consider if that's necessary. And here's a fun fact. Did you know that broccoli is a man-made food?
No, I did not.
Yeah. Broccoli has only existed for 6,000 years. It was created from selective breeding of a mustard plant. So I personally can't tolerate broccoli. It gives me a lot of digestive issues, and it makes sense because it wasn't always around. So, evolution takes a minute. So for whatever reason, my ancestors didn't adapt to broccoli, and so I can't really handle it. So it's interesting. Some of the things that we are told are super healthy are not necessarily healthy, such as spinach. Everyone loves these green smoothies. They think that's the healthiest thing. An excess of spinach can cause renal failure if you're not careful. So things like that. Yeah. So it's like, what can I eat? I would say that for most people, an animal product-based diet, a meat-based diet, is going to be the best bet. And then adding in extra things if you want to have some vegetables. Some people do great with them, and some people don't do well with vegetables at all, and they need to be on a carnivore diet. And I say that, and some people say, that's absolutely so extreme. That's fine. You can think like that. But if you look at examples of people that are doing well on carnivore, you will see that there are tons of people that do really well on it. So I personally landed in between keto and carnivore. I landed in the ketovore space. So I eat mostly animal products, but occasionally some salads and occasionally some nuts. And I still drink coffee, which is The strict carnivores will say you can't have coffee, but that's kind of where I landed. So I'm like carnivore-ish, and that's what's been the best result for me.
That's interesting. What about like fruits and veggies then? You said a little bit of veggies, but what about fruit?
I don't really eat too much fruit at all because I try to keep my carbohydrates under a certain number all the time. So I will sometimes have berries, like blueberries or blackberries, but I don't really have too many fruits to speak of, and vegetables only occasionally. I treat them as a garnish. And so when I say that to people, they say, well, what about vitamin C? And here's something interesting about vitamin C. The receptors for vitamin C in the body also they're very, very similar to the glucose receptors. So when you're having a lot of carbohydrates, you actually need more vitamin C than when you're having a very low carbohydrate diet. You don't need as much vitamin C. And that's why in tribes like the Inuit, who are more or less full-on carnivores, they don't have anything like scurvy because they're not ingesting carbohydrates to compete with the uptake of vitamin C. So that's the main one people say is vitamin C. Oh my God. That's the only one that if you kind of put it into your like nutrition app, it'll show, usually if you're doing a pretty strict carnivore diet, it'll show that you're not getting enough vitamin C. But other than that, all the other nutrients are pretty easy to get for the most part. I would say maybe iodine might be one. That's the one that I take. The only supplement I take is iodine. What
about like grains, that kind of stuff?
I don't recommend anyone eat grains.
Okay.
At all. And, it's one of the first things you see on this kind of standard of care or the standard recommended diet. Eat whole grains, eat this, eat that. No. Grains have only been in our diet for a few thousand years, so before farming, it wasn't a thing. It's not really a natural food for us. Carbohydrates are unnecessary. There's no such thing as an essential carbohydrate, so we don't need them at all in order to survive. And a lot of people have a lot of trouble digesting things such as gluten. A lot of people have trouble with fiber. We're always told, you need fiber. But why is it that when you are suffering with something like ulcerative colitis, when you're trying to heal from things like a surgery, they'll tell you not to eat any fiber? Well, then where's the logic there? So what we're actually seeing is that anybody with things like IBS tends to respond much better to a low to no fiber diet.
Interesting. Yeah. Did you ever read Blue Zones?
I haven't read it, but I've heard I've heard a lot about it. Yeah.
Yeah, I found it quite an interesting book because the study was of of longevity in life, like where geographically speaking in the world, where people are living the longest and healthy, like coherent and having a good long life and studying the diets of those people. And yeah, it was a pretty fascinating read. And I also recently listened to a podcast. I enjoy Sam Harris's Making Sense podcast, and he was interviewing Peter Attia about health and longevity. And I mean, the podcasts have like 3-hour episodes, and by the end of it, honestly, my head was kind of spinning on what the hell am I supposed to do now? I was, it's two doctors talking. So there was a lot of, a lot of specifics and about different quantities of things and all that. Now this has been really interesting. Is there anything I didn't ask you about or something you wanted to share? Because I'm being mindful of the time here.
Just something that I would mention, something I would mention is that, why this works, why these therapeutic diets can help things like ADHD, depression, anxiety, and so on. Of course, this isn't medical advice and you need to check with your doctor, but there are 4 main mechanisms right now that we know of as that would explain why these diets can help. One is glucose metabolism. So in the brain can either have glucose hypometabolism or glucose hypermetabolism, which is rarer but does exist. So basically the brain's not getting enough glucose into it. It's not using it properly. And this is linked to so many mental health conditions. And so by adjusting the diet so that we're not bombarding the brain with this constant, influx of carbohydrates, this can help the brain stabilize and help solve the issue of the glucose metabolism. So that's one. Another is inflammation. The brain can actually become inflamed. We don't always hear about it. We tend to hear about it more in the rest of the body, but the brain can be inflamed as well. So brain inflammation can be linked to things like Alzheimer's, but also just general other mental health issues. So a diet that is anti-inflammatory, like a ketogenic diet, or even a whole foods diet in many cases, can help with inflammation of the brain. Yeah, and so another one is the gut bacteria. They've done studies in children that went on to be diagnosed with ADHD, and they looked at their gut microbiomes as early as 6 months, and they found that even then they had different gut microbiomes. So ADHD does seem to have some link to the gut microbiome. Believe it or not. So, and a therapeutic diet can help you have, kind of like a better, let's say, a better gut situation, a better gut microbiome. Yeah. And then also just avoiding these kind of constant up and down swings like we would get with, with a sugar burner kind of diet can help us have more stable moods. And so those are a couple of different mechanisms by which these kind of diets can work. There's just a lot of resistance to it right now in general literature, and it's interesting to think about why. Is it because it's hard to get people to change their diets? Is it because it's easier to just try medication? If you take stimulant medication for ADHD, you will get a result in an hour and a half. Whereas, your diet's going to take at least a couple weeks for you to start to see results, and you have to be pretty strict about it in the beginning. And then also, I think this just kind of general mistrust of recommendations from us being overloaded with nutrition information. And lastly, that our doctors in general aren't given nutrition training, or are given a small amount of nutrition training that's not necessarily correct. So there's this whole landscape now of obstacles, let's say, in terms of getting people to adopt this kind of more, let's say, therapeutic or more nutrient-dense diet. So I consider myself, one of the fighters out there. I'm going to fight to try to change this. This is, my passion. I'm going to, die talking about this. They're going to have to pry the bacon out of my cold, dead hands, But this is something that I definitely recommend that if it's something that's, that you're interested in, you or whoever's listening, that, give it a little bit of a Google and look into ketogenic diets as a way to help with mental health, to improve mental health. Is it going to take you to where you're 100%, never having any problem again? Maybe not, but I feel like everyone gets at least some benefit from it. So it's definitely worth a shot.
And as far as like picking healthier meat products, are you talking about seafood too, by the way?
Mm-hmm. Yep, seafood's great.
So, because of factory farming and, all the crap they use to grow animals, any recommendations there? Especially, I don't know. I mean, I can only assume things are better in Colombia, but I have no idea. But I know in the U.S., it's, there are a lot of things at work. Any tips there for picking healthier products?
Yeah, don't worry about it.
Okay.
Don't worry about it, for real. And this is information I heard from a lecture from Dr. Sean Baker. He's one of the biggest, voices in the carnivore space, and he looked at the actual data, and there's no difference. He looked at kind of, organic versus non-organic meats, and he didn't see any difference in the people, in the actual effects on people. So, this is something I hear commonly. People say, oh, well, I want to start this diet, but I can't cook this and that and that. Well, I would say that in general, even what we would call quote unquote unhealthy meat is healthier than healthy like carb stuff. But what I mean by that is one of the most bioavailable sources, in fact, the most bioavailable source of protein is bologna, believe it or not. And nutrients. It's just our bodies use these these products very easily. And something like bologna is going to have all kinds of different parts of the animal in it. And so as long as it doesn't have any, you have to check the label and make sure there's nothing that's really wacky in there. And if you don't know what it is, look it up online. But for the most part, that your body's going to respond so much better to pretty much any animal product than it is to something like a big honkin' piece of bread or something like that. So I eat processed meat all the time. I eat bacon every day. I eat salami and things like that. And I feel better than I ever have in my life. You always hear that, like the health gurus saying you have to get grass-fed panda massage, whatever. No, you don't. You really don't. You can do this way of eating on a budget, and you don't have to stress about it because the data is showing that it really doesn't make a big difference. Now, if you have an unlimited budget and you want to get this organic meats, and you don't want to have processed meat, fine. That's fine. If you have time to do it, great. If you don't see that as an obstacle.
Do you think... Yeah, there's a lot to think about there. I mean, I would think with like bologna, for example, certainly hasn't been around that long in the grand scheme of things. But I see what you're saying, and I suppose it's certainly interesting. So certainly something worth investigating for folks, and yeah.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, a bologna itself is not like an ancestral food.
Right.
The components of it, are there. And so we have to think about the difference when we think about a processed meat versus a processed carbohydrate product, what's going on. And with a processed meat product, it's really more of a mechanical thing. And it's, the body's still able to understand exactly what that is. Whereas if you have a highly processed carbohydrate product, like, highly refined flours or something like that, that processing, the body, it's already something that the body doesn't really need, and now it's just even more kind of bad, let's say. So comparing processed carbs to processed meat, I don't think is a really fair comparison. Yeah.
Are there concerns with sodium in meat? Like I know bacon is really high in sodium.
So that's a whole other thing, is that sodium, we need a lot of sodium, especially if you're on a low carbohydrate diet. And if you really look at studies about sodium, it does not affect blood pressure in the long term. It will affect your blood pressure short term, like on that day, but long term, it really, really does not affect it. And it can actually cause a lot of problems having low sodium. So this is another one of those recommendations that turned out to be completely wrong.
Interesting. Yeah. All right. Well, this has been awesome. Where can people get a hold of you, learn more about the work that you're doing, Julie?
So I'm on YouTube at Julie Saad Wellness. So Saad is with 2 A's. And you can also find me online. My website is Saad with 2 A's.com. And I'm on there.
Hey, if you liked what you heard today, would you do me a favor? Would you visit wisesquirrels.com/love? That's where you'll find links to become a Patreon by supporting the show. You can advertise on the show. You can also record an audio comment, question, or even email me a question that I can include in an upcoming episode. And you can even leave a little review to let me know how I'm doing. There's more there. wisesquirrels.com/love.